Your knees feel a little different than they used to when you first stand up in the morning. Maybe it's your fingers stiff for the first few minutes until you've had your coffee. If you're over 60, you've probably noticed something like this, and you've probably wondered what it actually means and whether there's anything you can do about it. There's a food that keeps showing up in research on healthy aging over and over, and I think it's worth 20 minutes of your time to understand why. I'm Dr. Robert Vance, and if you were sitting across from me at my kitchen table right now, this is exactly how I'd walk you through it. Let me be honest with you about something before we go any further. There is no official medical ranking that names one single food as the best for every person on earth. Anyone who tells you that is oversimplifying things. But when researchers study the eating patterns of people who tend to age with strong hearts, flexible joints, and clear minds, one particular food keeps appearing near the top of the list again and again across different countries and different decades of research. That's the honest basis for calling it a leading choice. Not a magic ranking, real repeated evidence. I want to walk you through exactly what that evidence says, and just as importantly, what it doesn't say, because you deserve the full picture, not just the exciting part. Here's what I want you to understand first. Stiffness, achiness, that general feeling of not bouncing back the way you used to, those things can have a lot of different causes. Some of it is simply the normal wear that comes with using your joints for 6 or 7 decades. Some of it comes from old injuries that never fully healed. Some of it is inactivity because when we move less, our joints and muscles often become less forgiving, not more. And for some people, part of the picture involves a background process called inflammation. I want to be careful here because it's tempting to blame every ache on inflammation, and that's simply not accurate. Inflammation may be part of the picture for some people. It is not the explanation for every symptom. If something feels persistent, unusual, or is affecting your daily life, that's a conversation to have with your doctor, not something to self-diagnose from a video. With that said, let's talk about what inflammation actually is, because understanding it will help everything else in this video make sense. Think of inflammation as your body's emergency response system. When you cut your finger while chopping vegetables, you'll notice the area turn a little red, maybe swell slightly, and feel warm. That's inflammation showing up to do its job. Specialized cells rush to the area, blood flow increases so repair materials can arrive faster, and your immune system starts clearing away any damaged tissue. This is useful, it's protective. Without this response, a small cut could turn into something much more serious. So the first thing I want you to walk away with is this. Inflammation is not automatically your enemy. In its short-term form, it's a bodyguard doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The concern is when that response stays slightly active longer than it needs to, even without an obvious injury or threat to respond to. Picture hiring a security guard for one night, and instead of going home in the morning, that guard just stays on, patrolling your house every single day indefinitely, even when nothing is actually wrong. Over months and years, that constant low-level activity can create its own kind of wear. Researchers sometimes refer to this as chronic low-grade inflammation. It's quieter than the redness and swelling from a cut. It doesn't announce itself. It simply runs in the background. And this is where age becomes relevant, which brings us to why this matters specifically after 60. As we get older, several things tend to shift around the same time. Some research suggests the body may become slightly less efficient at fully switching off that inflammatory response once its job is done. This tendency has even earned a nickname among some researchers, inflammaging, a blend of the words inflammation and aging. I want to be clear that this is a described pattern, not a diagnosis, and not something that happens identically to everyone. People age differently, and your own health picture depends on your genetics, your history, and your daily habits, not just your birthday. At the same time, many of us move somewhat less than we did in our 30s or 40s, especially if joint discomfort has already crept in, which can become a bit of a cycle. Sleep patterns often shift with age too, and poor sleep has its own well-studied relationship with inflammatory markers in the blood. And ordinary life stress, whether it's caregiving, financial pressure, health concerns, or grief, has a documented connection to these same pathways. None of this means your body has failed you. It means your body may benefit from a bit more intentional support than it needed decades ago, in much the same way a well-built older home still benefits from occasional maintenance, even though the foundation remains completely solid. Now, here's a common misunderstanding I want to correct clearly, because it changes how you should think about everything that follows. Many people assume that managing inflammation means searching for one perfect food, supplement, or pill that flips a switch and solves the problem entirely. I understand why that idea is appealing. It would be wonderful if it worked that way, but your body responds to patterns over time, not to single events. One healthy meal doesn't undo years of habits, and one dessert doesn't erase years of good ones either. What the evidence actually points to is that the overall pattern, how you eat most days, how you move, how you sleep, and how you manage stress, tends to matter far more than any single ingredient. That said, some foods appear to fit into that healthy pattern more powerfully than others, based on a genuinely large body of research. And that brings us to the subject of this video. The food is extra virgin olive oil. I know that might not sound dramatic. There's no exotic story here, no rare ingredient you need to order online. It's something a lot of us already own, tucked in a cabinet, used occasionally for a salad, and mostly forgotten the rest of the week. But that ordinariness is part of what makes the research so compelling. This is one of the most studied foods in all of nutrition science, particularly in relation to heart health and long-term inflammatory markers in older populations. Let's talk about why the words extra virgin actually matter here, because this isn't just marketing language. Extra virgin olive oil is made by simply pressing olives and extracting the oil without high heat or chemical processing. Because the process is gentler, it retains a group of natural plant compounds called polyphenols. Think of polyphenols as protective compounds that plants produce to defend themselves against sun, stress, and pests. When we consume them, some research suggests they may support some of our own body's natural regulatory processes in a related way. One specific compound found in good quality extra virgin olive oil is called oleocanthal. Here's something that genuinely caught researchers' attention when it was first studied. Oleocanthal appears to interact with some of the same biological pathways as certain over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medications. I want to be very careful here because this exact fact gets exaggerated constantly online. Oleocanthal is not a medication. Olive oil is not a substitute for anything your doctor has prescribed, and nobody should ever stop taking a prescribed medication because they've started using olive oil instead. Food and medication are not interchangeable, even when a natural compound shares some biological overlap with a drug. What the research cautiously suggests is that this compound may contribute in a modest way to the body's normal inflammatory response, as one part of an overall healthy way of eating. That's a meaningfully different statement than olive oil cures inflammation, and I want you to leave this video with the accurate version. Beyond oleocanthal, extra virgin olive oil is largely made up of monounsaturated fat, a type of fat that has been associated with supporting healthier cholesterol levels when it replaces less favorable fats in your daily diet. This connects directly back to your blood vessels. Picture your blood vessels as a network of flexible hoses carrying blood throughout your entire body. The inner lining of those vessels is called the endothelium, and you don't need to remember that word, just what it does. It's the smooth surface blood flows across. When that lining stays smooth and flexible, blood moves efficiently, and your heart doesn't have to work as hard. Diets that include olive oil as a primary fat, replacing butter or heavily processed oils, have been associated in long-term studies with better cardiovascular outcomes, particularly among older adults. That's really the foundation of what's often called the Mediterranean eating pattern, which has been studied for decades and repeatedly associated with lower rates of heart disease and, in some studies, more favorable inflammatory markers. I want to pause and be direct with you about the limits of this evidence because that honesty is what makes the rest of this trustworthy. Research suggests has been associated with, may contribute to. I'm using careful language on purpose because that's genuinely what the science supports. No credible researcher would claim that olive oil eliminates inflammation, reverses arthritis, or cures heart disease. What the evidence does support is that regularly including good quality extra virgin olive oil as part of a broader healthy pattern of eating tends to be associated with better long-term health markers in a substantial number of studies. That's meaningful. It's worth your attention. It's just not a miracle, and I'll never present it that way. Let me make this real for a moment. Imagine someone in their late 60s who's cooked with whatever inexpensive vegetable oil was on sale for years, occasionally reaching for butter for flavor. There's nothing wrong with enjoying butter now and then. But if that person gradually shifted their primary cooking oil toward a good quality extra virgin olive oil, that's a small, realistic change, not a dramatic overhaul. It doesn't ask them to give up foods they love. It's simply choosing a well-supported fat source for the cooking they're already doing. But there's an important detail most people miss here, and it actually changes how effective this whole approach is. Not all olive oil sitting on grocery store shelves is the same, and this is where the extra virgin label becomes genuinely important. Regular olive oil, sometimes labeled pure or light, has typically been refined using heat and chemical processing that strips away much of that beneficial polyphenol content we talked about. It might still be a reasonable cooking fat, but it doesn't carry the same research backing as extra virgin. So when you're standing in the aisle looking specifically for the words extra virgin on the label is the simplest first step. Here's a second mistake that surprises people every time I explain it. Extra virgin olive oil is sensitive to light, heat, and air, and it doesn't last forever. Many households keep it sitting right on the counter next to the stove in a clear glass bottle for months at a time. That's almost the opposite of ideal storage. Light and heat gradually break down those beneficial compounds, which means the bottle sitting decoratively by your stove might be far less potent than the day you bought it, even if it still tastes fine. A simple fix is storing it in a dark cupboard away from heat and buying smaller bottles more often rather than one large bottle that sits open for a year. There's also a common myth worth correcting because I hear it constantly. Some people believe olive oil should never be heated, that cooking with it destroys its benefits, and that it should only be used cold. The reality is more nuanced. Extra virgin olive oil actually holds up reasonably well under normal home cooking temperatures, like sautéing vegetables or pan-searing fish, according to research on its heat stability. What it's not well suited for is prolonged, very high heat deep frying. For the everyday cooking most of us do, roasting vegetables, making a warm soup, sautéing dinner, using extra virgin olive oil is a perfectly reasonable choice, not something to fear. But let's talk about a reasonable amount because more is not automatically better. And I want to be honest about that too. Olive oil, like any oil, is calorie dense. And if weight management is part of your personal health picture, that's worth keeping in mind. Depending on your individual health situation, a reasonable option that many people choose is somewhere around 1 to 2 tablespoons a day, used consistently as part of an overall healthy way of eating, rather than poured on without any awareness of portion. Think of it less like a medicine you're carefully dosing and more like a valuable ingredient you're using with intention. Before making any changes, there is one important caution worth mentioning honestly. If you have gallbladder issues, fatty foods, including oils, can sometimes aggravate symptoms for some people, and that's worth discussing with your own doctor. If you take blood-thinning medication, it's worth knowing that very high intakes of certain polyphenol-rich foods have occasionally come up in research discussions related to clotting factors. Typical dietary amounts of olive oil are not generally considered a significant concern for most people. But anyone on blood thinners should still loop in their doctor or pharmacist before making a significant dietary shift, simply to be safe. This actually brings me to something I want to say plainly, not tucked away as a throwaway line at the end. Everything in this video is general educational information. It isn't a substitute for personalized medical advice. If you're managing a chronic condition, taking prescription medications, or have specific health concerns, please talk with your doctor or a registered dietitian before making meaningful changes to your diet. They know your history, your labs, and your individual circumstances in a way no video ever could. Food can genuinely support your overall health, but it works alongside good medical care, never in place of it. Let's zoom back out for a moment because I don't want to leave you thinking olive oil alone is some kind of complete answer. That wouldn't be honest, and I promised you honesty from the start. Remember what we talked about earlier? Inflammation, particularly the quiet background kind that becomes more common with age, responds to overall patterns, not single ingredients. Extra virgin olive oil is genuinely one of the better supported pieces of that pattern, but it works best alongside habits you likely already know matter, even when they're hard to prioritize. Movement is one of those habits. You don't need to train like an athlete. Research on older adults consistently associates regular, moderate movement, walking, gardening, swimming, gentle strength work with better regulation of inflammatory markers over time. When your muscles contract during movement, they actually release their own beneficial compounds into your bloodstream that appear to help regulate this process. That's something your body does automatically. simply from staying active. Sleep plays a role here too, more than most people realize. During deep sleep, your body carries out a significant amount of repair and regulatory work, some of it directly related to inflammation. Poor or insufficient sleep has been associated with higher inflammatory markers the following day. If a rough night's sleep leaves you feeling stiffer than usual the next morning, that's not just in your head. There's likely a real physiological thread connecting the two. And then there's stress, often the hardest piece for people to address, because life doesn't always hand us the option to simply reduce it. Chronic psychological stress has a well-documented relationship with the body's inflammatory pathways. This doesn't mean you need to become a meditation expert overnight. Even small, consistent practices, a short walk outside, time with people you care about, a hobby that genuinely relaxes you, have been associated with measurable benefits in research over time. I share all of this not to hand you an overwhelming list of things you should be doing, but because I want you to see the whole picture clearly. Extra virgin olive oil isn't a lonely hero doing all the work by itself. It's one well-supported piece of a larger pattern that includes movement, sleep, stress, and overall diet. When these pieces work together, that's typically when people notice the most meaningful support for healthy aging. Let me give you a picture of what that can look like in an ordinary week, because abstract ideas are much easier to hold on to when you can see them lived out. Think about someone in their early 70s who wants to keep gardening every spring, kneeling in the dirt, planting tomatoes, and getting back up without needing to grab onto something for support. That's not a small thing. For a lot of people, being able to garden or get down on the floor to play with a grandchild or carry groceries up a flight of stairs without stopping to catch their breath is exactly what staying independent actually means in real life. It's rarely about some dramatic health milestone. It's about the ordinary moments that make up a normal week. For that person, the changes that matter most usually aren't complicated. A short walk most mornings, even 15 or 20 minutes. Cooking dinner with extra virgin olive oil instead of a heavily processed oil. Most of the time, not every single time. Going to bed at a slightly more consistent hour, even if it's imperfect. None of these changes make headlines. None of them feel dramatic enough to post about, but stacked together week after week, they tend to be exactly the kind of pattern that shows up in the research we've been discussing, the kind associated with older adults who report more energy, better mobility, and fewer complaints about stiffness over time. I also want to acknowledge something honestly, because pretending everyone's situation is identical wouldn't be fair to you. People come into their 60s, 70s, and 80s from very different starting points. Someone who has stayed active their whole life is working from a different foundation than someone who is just now starting to think seriously about these habits. That's completely fine. It doesn't mean it's too late, and it doesn't mean you need to catch up all at once. Research on habit change consistently shows that starting small and staying consistent tends to outperform dramatic short bursts of effort that fizzle out after a few weeks. If today is the day you decide to switch your cooking oil and take a walk after dinner, that's a completely legitimate starting point, regardless of where you're starting from. Now let's get practical, because I always want to leave you with something usable, not just interesting facts to file away. One practical option is simply swapping your primary cooking oil. If you've been using a heavily processed vegetable oil for your morning eggs or evening vegetables, consider switching that bottle out for a good quality extra virgin olive oil instead. It's a one-time decision at the store that pays off every time you cook afterward. Some people also choose to use it as a finishing touch, not just a cooking ingredient, a drizzle over soup right before eating, over roasted vegetables, over a piece of grilled fish, or blended into a simple vinaigrette with vinegar and a touch of mustard, brings both flavor and those beneficial compounds into meals you're probably already making. This is one of the simplest, lowest effort changes covered in this entire video, and it may also be one of the most meaningful. If you enjoy bread, a reasonable way to think about this is using a small amount of good olive oil for dipping some of the time instead of butter, not as a strict rule, just as one more small shift in the overall pattern without giving up something you genuinely enjoy. And if you'd like to go further, it's worth looking into what's often called the Mediterranean eating pattern as a general framework rather than a rigid plan. It naturally centers on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, and fish, with olive oil as the primary fat and red meat and highly processed foods appearing less often. This isn't about eliminating foods you love, it's about a general direction you lean toward more often than not. There's one more mistake worth mentioning, because I see it trip people up more than almost anything else. Some viewers hear information like this and decide to change everything at once: the oil, the walking routine, the sleep schedule, the stress management, all starting Monday morning. That kind of all or nothing approach often backfires, not because the individual pieces are wrong, but because it's simply hard to sustain that much change simultaneously. A more realistic way to think about it is picking one piece to start with this week, letting it become a normal part of your routine, and then adding the next piece once the first one feels automatic. If switching your cooking oil is the easiest place to begin, start there. The walk can come next month. There's no prize for doing everything at once, and there's real value in doing a few things consistently for years. I want to return to something I mentioned near the beginning because I think it's the most important idea to carry with you. You are not powerless here. Getting older genuinely does change how your body manages inflammation, how quickly you recover, and how your joints and blood vessels function over time. That's simply biology, and pretending otherwise wouldn't be honest. But within that reality, you still have real influence. The choices you make today, small, unglamorous choices like which bottle of oil sits in your cabinet, do appear to matter over the months and years ahead, not as a guarantee, but as one meaningful, well-supported piece of a bigger picture that remains largely within your control. Here's what I want older adults especially to understand. Healthy aging was never about becoming a different person overnight or overhauling your entire life in 1 week. It's about small, consistent choices, repeated again and again, that quietly add up in ways you might not notice day to day, but absolutely notice over a year or two. The person who swaps their cooking oil, adds a short daily walk, and pays a little more attention to their sleep isn't doing anything dramatic, but given enough time, that consistency tends to show up in how they feel, how they move, and how independently they're able to live. If there's one thing I hope you take from our time together today, it's this. Inflammation isn't something to fear. It's something worth understanding, and once you understand it, you have real practical tools available to you. Extra virgin olive oil, used thoughtfully as part of an overall healthy pattern, is genuinely one of those tools worth knowing about. Before making any significant changes to your diet, especially if you're managing a chronic condition or taking medication, please have a conversation with your doctor or a registered dietitian. They can help you apply this information in a way that fits your individual circumstances safely and appropriately. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you already cook with extra virgin olive oil? Has it been a staple in your kitchen for years? Or is this something you're considering trying for the first time? Tell me how you use it, whether that's over vegetables, in a salad dressing, or somewhere else entirely. I read through the comments, and hearing how real people are applying this kind of information genuinely means a lot to me. If clear, honest, evidence-informed health education for adults over 60 is useful to you, I'd appreciate you subscribing to the channel. There's more of this ahead, always grounded in real research, always explained in a way that respects your time and your intelligence, always focused on helping you move through the years ahead with strength, clarity, and independence. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.